Well, thank you, everyone. We've been given roughly 20 minutes, 30 minutes to talk amongst ourselves, and then we'll be throwing the floor open for questions. There'll be questions up on the board, which I'll be taking, and there will also be mics going around for questions as well. I think you've all read the bios. I'm not going to waste time reading the bios. That's why you've got the app. We all know Antonio, an extraordinary job that he's done over 2 terms in charge of Los Angeles. And he arrives here in Europe at a time when something's happening which is extraordinary. The notion of inclusion may have been a very polite word on a list of checklists for many mayors around the world, but in Europe, it's right at the top for every single city. If you're not dealing with inclusion today, you'll be dealing with it in the coming weeks. Even here in the Basque country, they know that Spain is putting up its hand to take thousands of refugees, and that means every city will be taking their quota of refugees. Every single city in Europe has to think about inclusion in an extraordinary way. Where do we look to for lessons? And interestingly, I think, Mayor, we should turn to you, because tell us a little bit, first of all, quickly about the makeup of Los Angeles, because it's an extraordinary city where some 40% of the people were not born in Los Angeles.
Yeah, actually the number is 44% of Los Angeles, foreign-born. About 2/3 of Los Angeles comes from Latin America, Asia, and Africa. I think 220 languages or so, 120 countries. There are a number of nations that have their largest population in LA outside of their country of origin. So when you think of the diversity, it's not just broad, but it's deep as well.
And tell me, do you think Los Angeles is a successful example of inclusion? When you look at the landscape, how communities work, do you think this is something we could learn from?
Look, we're struggling with the changing demographics in Los Angeles, in America, just as Europe struggles with it. Differently, obviously. You don't have to live in Ferguson or Baltimore to understand that. I was joking with you back there when we were talking earlier, and I'm 3rd generation American of Mexican descent. Only the second person of Mexican descent to become Speaker of the Assembly, and the first to be mayor in 133 years. And when I was running, I was described as the Latino candidate for mayor, and I had to challenge that notion because I said, I was born here. My mother was born here. My grandpa came here 100 years ago. Why are you describing me that way? And as we said, we're describing history, they said. So we struggle. We still struggle with the changing demographics. In Hungary, they want to build a fence. We've been talking about walls for a long time along the southern border. When I say we, I don't mean me, obviously, because when they first started talking about walls, I was in Mexico as mayor, and I said, we don't need walls, we need bridges, and we do. And I do think one of LA's strengths, notwithstanding the fact that we're always struggling, is the fact that we are as inclusive. I joked with you that, by the time I left, I was described as the Latino candidate for mayor, and by the time I left, we left with a 58% approval rating, which means half the people weren't happy with me. But nobody described me that way. I was everybody's mayor, and I made it comfortable. In fact, the next guy, who had a small amount of blood from Mexico, actually ran as a Latino, which big change 15 years later.
Now tell me, when we look in Europe, what's happening is that many cities are trying to put up those barriers, whether they're physical or not. And in many other cities, if you go to Germany, if you were in Munich at the Hauptbahnhof last week, you would have seen regular people from the city going there to welcome people. But there's a concern in all of those cities about how they fast-track inclusion into their cities. For you, you live in a city which is bilingual in many ways, that has done many things to try still to include people. What's top of the agenda for you? Is it education? Do you think that it's transport that links neighborhoods? What are one of the 2 lessons that we may not know about when you're a mayor? You think about, okay, these are the ways that I make a very diverse city feel some sense of common ownership.
Bilingual, talk about multilingual. I mean, we speak virtually every language, and large populations speaking these languages, not just a few. But it's got to be education. I tell people historically, mayors don't really involve themselves in the schools, and certainly with all of the bureaucracy and the powerful interest representing adults, by the way, not kids. Mayors have been reticent to do that. But I understood that if we were going to address the changing demographics in a way that mainstreamed many of these groups that have been left out, they had to be educated. So I took on this issue of education because when I became mayor, we had a 44% graduation rate. By the time I left, it was 72, but as I tell people, that's nothing to brag home to mother about. Everybody should be going, graduated from high school and going on to college or have a skill. So yes, I think there's nothing more important in education. And while there were many people in not just my city, but in the urban core of America, where the poor are, and primarily communities of color, aren't graduating and going on to college in the numbers that they should. That's one of the big challenges for us in terms of the civil rights movement. If we don't educate them and mainstream them, you'll see them continue down the prison pipeline that you see disproportionately in the states across the country and in the urban core.
And tell me, why was it such a battle in Los Angeles? I know you had huge fights over education. You took on the education board. In many US cities, this what's happening with education really seems to be at the front line of debate, of how money is spent, how you bring in communities. Why was there such a fight in Los Angeles?
Well, I've broken a few glass ceilings over the years now. And what I tell people, I can and I have because I can read and write. And if these kids can't read and write, they're not going to make it. And there's a very strong bureaucracy across the country that basically takes the position that because they're poor, that somehow they can't learn. And I've not accepted that because that would have, crossed me out from, going to college and law school and being where I've gone. So I think it is incumbent on America's mayors and on great cities to have the talent pool that they need, and to have to be able to let the strength of the diversity of our towns, a town like mine, really kind of flower when it's educated.
And just staying finally on this notion of inclusion, when we look from Europe at many US cities, you see a kind of segregation among schools still, where communities are historically a majority, say, Hispanic or black or white, and they go to their own schools. Is that the case in Los Angeles?
Still, yes. I mean, disproportionately, they're not officially segregated. They're just segregated by poverty or primarily. So yes, there's still schools. I run 17 schools, and as mayor, I ran them, and I've continued to hold on to them. 17 schools in Watts, the east side of Los Angeles, downtown, three of the poorest areas of Los Angeles, and they've shown a lot of growth, but no question that these schools are maybe 99% of color and poor.
So coming back to the broader commitment to cities and how you bring people into the fold, when you look at what's happening here in Europe, what do you think are the lessons we could learn from Los Angeles about how you bring people together?
Well, I think, again, we've struggled with it. I mean, America's been struggling with this from its very beginning, when our founding fathers were just talking about men, one, and men of European extraction who own property. And over the centuries, as President Obama said, we've become a more perfect nation, but we still struggle. So can Europe learn from our struggles? Without question. Because when I say we struggle, we do, and yet we did elect President Obama. There are people like me that are getting elected around the country, African American and Latino and Asian and women, in numbers that, very different from what you see here. So yes, Europe can learn from us, but we're still struggling and learning from ourselves. Again, I think on the OECD list, we're 16th in equality of opportunity. So we used to be the place where everybody said, come to America, bring me your tired, poor, huddled masses, and you'll be able to start here and go there. That's not happening on the scale that it used to, and that it could and should. And so what we have to learn from one another is creating that society is critical. If you want people to feel a part of, they've got to believe that their talent will take them wherever their talent could take them. And as I said, a key to that is education. But it's also this notion of respecting, diversity and inclusion.
Tell me why you think it's important for cities to be not just cities, but global cities. It's interesting being here in Bilbao. Here's a city that looks outside of its own public spaces. It looks outside the city limits to find architects, urban planners, thinkers, businesses to come here and shake up actually quite a small city, but it's already thinking in a global context.
Without question. In fact, when I was walking in, I thought, well, why this venue? And then as I sit down, if you all turn around for a second, look at over there. That's why this venue. Look at Bilbao. Bilbao understood, a small city by, world standards, understood that didn't matter if you saw yourself globally. And so they convened us here. Thank you, council member, by the way, for that. I was embarrassed. I wanted to sit here while he was speaking, but he said it was okay. I could stay over there. I thought it was the right thing to do. But I mean, what a great thing. They brought in a world-class architect who, by the way, is from Los Angeles, a good friend of mine, Frank Gehry. And when I come back, Disney Hall is great, but it's not the Guggenheim. I mean, this is amazing. And so, what are the characteristics of great cities? One, you got to see yourself as a great city. And if there was something I tried to do back when even though LA was a city of 4 million, by the way, whoever said 5, even though it was a city of 4 million and the GDP of the LA metropolitan area, I think is roughly $775 billion. We didn't always see ourselves that way. I tried to share with LA, hey, the world looks to LA. And so we should be an example to the world. And I think what Bilbao understood, architecture and art and culture are critical. Convening people, big thinkers to come here to think about urban space is essential. You and I talked about, during my term as mayor, we opened up more rail lines and bus lines and starting subways and other lines than at any time in our history's period, in that short period of time. And yet, when people ask me and describe me as maybe the transportation mayor, I said it really wasn't about transportation. It was about reimagining the city. And I think that's what Bilbao is doing, reimagining their city. This was an industrial town. They've gotten this waterway, and by the way, we wanted to do the same thing. Doesn't look like yours. We got a lot to learn from Bilbao. But there's an opportunity to connect urban space and green space with waterways. And so they've done, I think, an incredible job of understanding that you don't have to be big to see yourself in a global context. And I'm proud that LA sees that itself more and more as that global city.
And tell me, so do you see the job of being the mayor of a large metropolitan city in the US as being a bit like a prime minister or a bit like a CEO? What's your job description really about?
Well, Bloomberg and I, and we're contemporaries and friends, and daily in Chicago, whenever we meet mayors of Madrid and these large Rome and Shanghai, we say that person can one day go on to be president or prime minister, and it happens. They understand in these countries the role of global cities. In the United States, that almost never happens. You could be the governor of a state that is a fraction the size of New York or LA or Chicago, and you have a better chance of going on to be the head of state. And that's true even though around the world, Take Kyoto. You know, we weren't able to come to agreement, our national governments, and so they came together in Copenhagen. At Copenhagen, do you know where the action was? It wasn't with the national governments, because all they were doing were pointing fingers at one another who created this mess and trying to get out of the room quicker to see who could do the least. The mayors were trying to outdo one another. So all of us were saying, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? I want to do what you're doing. We all saw each other as the incubators of great ideas around climate change and really the places where it's happening. I mean, LA, the place of the dirtiest air in the United States, #1 American city in reducing carbon emissions, number 5 in the world. And as we were talking about, and nobody would know that, but you know, we knew that. We signed down to Kyoto when the United States didn't, and now more than 1,000 cities have done that in the United States. And around the world, the great cities are all participating in the C40 group, trying to see who can, you know, lead the way. I did 140,000 street lamps from incandescent lights to LED, #1 city, I think. Guangzhou was #2 and London #3. And, you know, we got that idea not from probably from some small town that got it before us. But we kind of germinated it.
You were very good at getting on a plane. You went to Korea, you went to London, you traveled the world, you met city leaders, you met people who are business leaders. You were out there, you know, fighting for your city to get people to come and invest. How does that go down with the electorate? Because I know in Europe, often, if a mayor dares to go on more than a bus, he's kind of on the front page of the newspaper, let alone getting on an international flight. How did that go down with your electorate?
Well, you could tell you're a journalist from Europe and not from LA, because they didn't describe it as I was very good at getting out of my city. They described it as all I was out of my city, and that it wasn't about my city, that it was about me. But I didn't let that stop me. And I think you and I talked about that as well a few minutes ago. I understood that the cackle of these Monday morning quarterbacks wasn't something I had to listen to. LA moves 44% of all the seaborne goods. LA is the door to the Pacific Rim. And when you look in the world today, where the action is, it's been in Asia. It's not in the United States, and it's not in Europe. Also increasingly in Africa, but Asia's where it's been. So I said, let's look east, and I spent a lot of time in Asia, and then I started looking south to Latin America. Where that connection? So I know the German Marshall Fund reaches across the Atlantic, and I want to thank them for bringing us together. But I was looking very, very focused east and south. That's where LA is frankly prospered, and it's why, you know, more Chinese tourists come to LA. I opened up the first Chinese city tourism office in 2006. About 175,000 Chinese were coming. We had some demographers sharing with us that soon 50 million people from China would have the means to be able to travel to Los Angeles. By the time I opened the second one in Shanghai in 2012, there were 475,000 tourists. There are now more than 600,000 coming to Los Angeles. Trade with, we move 44% of their goods as well. So I understood that connection was critical. And you're right, wherever you're mayor of, you're going to get criticized. I was joking, my daughters are here with me. My youngest daughter has been to Barcelona more times than me. This was my third time, but I was always here on official business, and I was working 18 hours a day. I never saw anything. I didn't see anything in Barcelona. It was as if I wasn't even there, except for a restaurant. And so to be able to see these places now is different. But back then, you're doing 18 hours a day, and you're
not for Los Angeles, but is there a danger?
Trying to bring business.
Is there a danger for other cities in the US? You know, LA has such a powerful brand, is so good at kind of attracting attention, whatever it does. But if you're competing city against city, state against state, there's no kind of national, federal cooperation. If you're thinking just of yourselves, even the towns are outside the city limits, do they begin to wilt and die because all of the power is based on one of these 2 or 3 magnetic metropolitan brands?
Well, again, when I got elected mayor, the opinion makers of Los Angeles, and primarily our newspaper of record, did not see its own city as that global city you described, that one of a handful. I did. I understood that, and I was not afraid of carrying that banner. But I also, well, I was president of all the mayors, of the Conference of Mayors, and I can tell you that the only difference between the mayor of Bilbao and the mayor of Los Angeles is the size of the stage. And in fact, this city clearly sees himself on the global world stage in a way that we haven't historically. And so I would just say that we actually saw one. There was a healthy competition between us, but around the world, the mayors kind of see we're the doers, and the national governments have the right and the left that eat each other up until people hate politics like they do in Europe and the United States and Latin America and Asia, virtually everywhere in the world. The mayors are more connected to people, and I think more innovative, and really drive the change. Here's an example. The United States of America. If I told you that the top 10 cities of the United States, if we were a country, we'd be the 3rd largest country in the world, a $5 trillion economy. If you took just the economies of New York, LA, and Chicago, we have an economy the size of France. People don't realize just how big we are. But, it takes a lot of metropolitan cities, and I learned from, mayors of Phoenix and New Orleans, but also Mexico City and Bogota and Shanghai and, Copenhagen and, and now that I've been to Barcelona and Madrid, wow, I want one of those.
Now tell me, we're being very generous here. This is a great track record. Lots of things have gone right. We understand why Los Angeles is an amazing city. What did you do wrong?
What did I do wrong? Well, I had a messy divorce. No kidding. And you got to take responsibility for that because it let a lot of people down, and including my family. And that was a tough time, and it was in the middle of a recession, so it made everything, all the tough decisions, even tougher because popularity went from 84% to the 40s. I'd say the second tough thing I did, I really believe in rewarding work, and I had, I'm a Democrat, and I was felt like many of the public sector workers working in the city hadn't gotten a raise in years, and I gave them the largest raise in LA history. And then the recession came, and I asked for the money back. And when they wouldn't give it to me, so that was the second big mistake. When they wouldn't give it to me, I had to make some really tough decisions, and I did. I laid off more people than anybody in LA history, and I furloughed them, 40 days a year for a number of years, and that wasn't popular. And taking on the teachers union as well, not because I wanted to, because I actually believe in unions, but because I said, we got to make these changes. And so in some ways, my biggest mistakes created a situation that required that I had to pull something from deep inside of me to make probably the toughest decisions in the 20 years I've been in politics, because as you know, before this, I was Speaker of the California State Assembly and Majority Leader before that. So it was, it wasn't good that I made those mistakes, but it certainly gave me a constitution and a kind of a body armor, if you will, that helped me along the way.
Thank you for a very honest answer. When you look at the city, the extraordinary thing about a good mayor is you make things, you plan things, you fund things that you don't see happen. You are out of office, someone else gains from your wins and your loses. When you look at the legacy that you left for Los Angeles, I mean, I know there are many things like the subway line, which will come, isn't even finished now. But when you look at the legacy, what would you say your legacy was for Los Angeles?
You know, people think it's education or climate change or, you know, public safety. 45% drop in violent crime and homicides. LA with New York is the safest big city in America. Transportation, as you said, though it wasn't just about transportation, it was about reimagining the city as Bilbao was doing. It was about creating great, smart growth that was elegant and beautiful. But what I walk away with is what we started out with. By the time I left as mayor, I was no longer, you know, what does it mean to have a Latino mayor? You know, I was everybody's mayor. I'd walk in a black church, an AME or CME or a Baptist church, and I was described as their mayor. In the Armenian community, in the Korean community, in the Filipino community, in the Jewish community, in virtually every community, I was so connected that people felt okay. And I think if my election did something, it kind of made people feel comfortable with the changing diversity and the changing demographics. And now people always say in LA, our strength is our diversity. When I was growing up, I don't think I ever heard a politician or anyone say our strength is our diversity. But by the time I left, you know, there was a lot of talk, and it certainly wasn't just about me. But as I said, I've broken a few glass ceilings now, and me and the others, I think people are feeling better about ourselves. And it's why we're embracing immigration. You know, we did something at the state level, and it's still not completely popular, but providing health care to the undocumented. Now, in Europe, that's something you do because you believe health care is a right and not a privilege. We're still very behind in that regard. You know, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we weren't giving them driver's licenses. Giving them health care was a big, I mean, they got emergency health care all the time, but giving them health care for kids, that was a big deal. You know, allowing them to qualify for in-state tuition, big deal. You're seeing that people are saying, well, let's just embrace this, it's the future. And it's good. It's good.
Thank you. I think it would only be fair at this point to open up the questions to the floor. There are many other topics that are very important to the mayor, which the former mayor, the 41st mayor of Los Angeles, that we have not touched on, which include crime and how that changed by lowering the crime rates to bring in people. We'll take some questions off here. There's 2 mics. Oh, great. Thank you very much. With glasses there. And we'll also be, there's 2 mics going around. I'll take one first off here, and then we'll dive into some questions from the floor. The first question is from Doug Johnson, who's from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. Is what type of ideas would you suggest we find as a way to incubate to tackle the high housing costs in cities like LA?
Well, that really hits it right on the point. Transportation, as I said, was not just about building light rail and you know and subways. It was about reimagining the city and reimagining public space, so public and community space, and so that housing's critical to that. So everything we did when we did, you know, the half-penny sales tax generating $40 billion over 30 years to build public transportation, because the government, neither the federal government or the state government, were really helping the cities. We said we've got to incentivize transit-oriented development, so development around transit lines. Now, the urban planners here know that cities have been doing that for for not 100 years, but for a very long time. LA was the first city of sprawl, and so we had gone in the opposite direction. So what we've done now is trying to figure out, what we have to figure out rather, is how to make sure that as we rebuild the city, we don't gentrify it in a way where poor people can't live, where only the wealthy can live. So that means we're going to have to create incentives around affordability and affordable housing. And I think that can't just be a city function. You know, if you told the feds, the senators and the congressmen, or whoever's governor, that it should be a state and federal responsibility. They would say it shouldn't be, but it should. They have to participate, because in the end, we can't have cities that are segregated and become enclaves of poverty in the way that you see many of our cities. We're going to have to integrate them much more. That means education, but it also means housing and jobs. So we got to do smart things and use tools, economic development tools, to do that.
Brilliant. Let's take a question from the floor. Who's right? The gentleman here. Could we bring the mic? Would you mind saying your name and where you're from? Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Johnson from Baltimore by way of Cleveland. When we talk about the notion of inclusion, I remember there being this feeling in kind of post-civil rights America that what made a mayor effective was not necessarily just dealing with issues of diversity and ensuring that the poor was being taken care of, but that people of color and institutions became wealthy. And so when you think about a Maynard Jackson in Atlanta or even a Marion Barry in Washington, D.C., what they're most known for is how many millionaires did they create? How many people did they set up to become billionaires? And I think we've gotten away from that and not really dealt with power when it comes to diversity in mayors. How did you view that within the city of Los Angeles? And at any point did you say, I want to create millionaires that are people of color? And how did you go about that without creating necessarily set-asides or targeted percentages that just said we want a certain number of people of color to have businesses that get contracts? But literally, how do you create a robust economy that targets people of color who are business owners to create generational wealth, which to me is what the telltale sign is of shifting from inclusion to community and power?
Well, I think, and thank you for that question, because you hit something really important. As a reaction to the great work of people like Maynard Jackson and other leaders around the country, there became a resistance and a pushback. And so in my state, they did Proposition 209, the anti-affirmative action. And you'll see that happen here, because there'll be an argument. How do we integrate these refugees, these new people? What do we do? They're not going to our universities. How do we get them into our university? I don't know if you know, but my story is, I went to UCLA on an affirmative action program. And I always say, some people will say, I went in through the back door. But one thing's for sure, I got out the front. I'm the only person to graduate from UCLA who became Speaker of the California State Assembly and Mayor. And but I came in, on some special admission program. Well, they stopped all that. So it was really difficult for me. And you hit it. I knew that if we're not creating the wealth builders, who can challenge, economic might, you're not going to be able to do as much as you can do to advance communities. And so it was really difficult, because without the strong goals and timetables, it just becomes words. Now, what happened? You want to know in LA? I said 44% foreign born. 44% of all the small businesses today in LA started by minorities. 44%. They're Latino, they're Black, they're Korean, they're Vietnamese, they're Armenian. They're coming from everywhere, and they're starting it. They're doing it on their own. I believe that if we're going to accelerate this integration, we got to be able to use some of those tools that people like Maynard Jackson and others were able to do. In California, it has become difficult. When we passed 209, I got up in a speech and I said, there was only one African American at UC Bolt Law School. And I said, this isn't Mississippi. This isn't Alabama. This is California. Well, guess what? Now they're a handful, and maybe a little more than that. But in terms of the numbers, we don't see that. So it's connected to education. It's connected to be able to use the tools that you can to do exactly what you said has been done. It was really difficult. And I think it's something we're going to have to, the UCs today, where I went to UCLA, the UCs today have a small percentage of Latino and African American in terms of the kids that are in our schools. But because of the anti-affirmative action initiatives, it's very difficult. And I was a regent, by the way, and speaker, and said, I want to see more diversity. And it was tough. So you hit it right in the head. Building economic power is critical for all of us. And it's going to be critical for, these refugees that come to your countries can't live in small ghettos and never move out. They got to be able to make it. And we struggle with that, and you're going to struggle with that too. And until we figure it out, you'll see tension in our, in LA, in Baltimore, in Chicago, in Paris, in Madrid, wherever it is.
And I know that Chicago is one of the points here. We've only got probably time for one more question, so I think we'll just keep it in the room for now. Is there somebody else who has a question that they would like to ask? Be brave. Down here. Thank you very much.
Hi, Allison Seabrook, Community Development Foundation in London. It's interesting you mentioned the issue of gentrification, and I wasn't quite sure whether that was just something we were talking about quite significantly, particularly in London. Is that a role that you're seeing mayors coming together to start to discuss, and how you overcome those perceptions and the actual reality?
When I became mayor, I joined the Conference of Mayors, and as I told you, I became the president. I only wanted to deal with one thing. I wanted to deal with the issue of poverty, work, and opportunity in our cities. And I focused on that for 2 years. I led a commission to look at these issues. This issue of gentrification is key to that. My kids grew up in a more integrated environment. I grew up in a very segregated environment. They've been able to benefit from that in a way that I didn't. When I first went to UCLA, it was my first opportunity to be out of the neighborhood I grew up in. And, it was a culture shock. It was almost as if I was going to Paris or, some other country. It was. And when people don't live together, when people don't see aspirationally people like them be able to make it, they don't think they can make it. In my schools, the first thing I say to my kids in Watts, African-American boys, Latinos, boys, the first thing I said, and the girls, by the way, I said to all of them, I say, do you believe in you? We've got to set high expectations in our schools, and we've got to have a society where we believe in the goodness of people. The guy driving me right now said something to the effect, can you believe in this day and age that we still have, speaking of the refugees, racism and ethnophobia? And it's crazy that in this day and age that we still have that. And I said, yes, it is crazy. And so how do we change that? We've got to make investments in people. All of us. Europe is no different from the United States. And what I wanted to be clear about, well, Europe can learn from us and we can learn from them. We're not some island unto ourselves. We struggle with a lot of it. But gentrification is one of those struggles. So the LA downtown area is blossoming. Everybody's talking about it. And it's, very proud that it happened, recently. But not everybody's benefiting from that flowering. And we want everybody to benefit. That's when we could all be proud of it. We can be proud of our countries and the world when everybody benefits by the opportunity, not when we keep ourselves closed.
Thank you. Just before we go, in just like 2 seconds, we know what you have done. Are you happy to reveal or hint at what you might do next?
Yeah.
That's a no.
I'm going to make an announcement here in Bilbao. First of all, I want to thank the German Marshall Fund and all of you for coming.
So he is a politician after all.
Yeah. And second of all, look, I think I've made it pretty clear. I'd like to serve again. I've been mayor. I've been speaker, so I've been on the legislative side, and I've been a chief executive. I like the chief executive side. So I don't think you have to be a brain surgeon to think through what those opportunities would be in my state. And I think soon enough people will get a very clear idea of what the path ahead to that will be. I will say this: I believe in public service, and I wanted to be here because I don't buy the idea that all of us who choose to serve are somehow people who are just in it for ourselves. I do believe that public service is an honor, and that the people who enter public service mostly want to do good. So I'd like to go back, clearly. I think I have a record to point to, and time will tell.
We'll see. I've been told we can take, actually, we're going to squeeze in a couple more questions just because
good.
there are so many up here that we didn't get around to doing. So let's take Marissa Navarro's question. I'm from Chicago, a city notorious for its segregation. How do you see this issue impacting LA?
Well, again, they say something. I've heard it said that LA's the most segregated city in America, and I know Baltimore, having been there, and D.C. and other places are pretty segregated to me. So I think the urban core of our cities clearly have a lot of work to do to address this lack of integration and mainstreaming, both politically and economically, as was mentioned. But education is the key to that. I say it's the new civil rights issue of our time. And it's why I've been unafraid to challenge the most powerful interests, because I said, the role of the first, and I was the first in 133 years, is not to bang on your chest and say how great I am. I got here on the shoulders of others. I got here because there was a Voting Rights Act and a Civil Rights Act that opened up the country to me. I know that. So the role of the first is to open up the door for the rest. You can't open up that door if they can't read and write. So that's why I focused on education, because disproportionately it's kids of color. In yours, it's people that aren't, born in Spain or born in, or sometimes they are, but they're from some other place in the world, not Europe, and they're not brought in the way that they need to be. And I tell people this is good for all of us. One, because you'll be able to benefit from the talent of the world. But two, because it's either that or it's, the conflict, the tension, the battling of people who want to be free and want to participate and to reach for the stars and follow their dreams.
Now, there's another very good question here, which is how do new immigrants add to a city's global engagement? And I think what's important about this is the narrative here in Europe is all about what are we going to have to do for the refugees, as though it's a kind of one-way process, forgetting that actually these refugees are going to bring wealth, knowledge, a diversity, connections, and certainly if you sit in the UK and you look at the number of companies who trade, say, with India or Pakistan, that's down to the immigrant communities that came to the UK. Do you think we forget this? That it's
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me tell you something. First of all, I speak 2 languages. More Americans should speak 2 languages and 3 languages like they do in Europe, and 4 and 5. That's 1. 2, if I do well when I go around the world, you know why I do well? I don't think that America knows, is the only country that, can tie their shoes, the 2 shoelaces, if you will. I mean, I recognize we can learn from other people. You get that when you grow up in a diverse city. And I think what we don't get, demographically, Europe's getting older. Demographically, you're not making children in the way that you did a generation ago. I guess that was a double entendre. And so you need these people. I tell people, as an example, in the United States, if we give the 11 million undocumented a pathway to citizenship, they'll keep our Social Security system and our Medicare system alive. They'll get educated and contribute to the people who are getting older. That's going to happen in Europe too. We can grow and learn from one another in a way that we all benefit. I I spent a lot of time in these communities, and I benefited from it, learning culturally, be culturally relevant. I tell my children have grown up, and they've been in the homes of the poorest people in this town, people of every ethnic group. They've also been in the homes of the richest people. They have a cultural intelligence that you can't buy. And you get that when you realize that we can all benefit from this. So I think Europe can benefit in many ways, including social cohesion, but also, you have a very great system of social benefits. If you want to keep them, bring them in. Educate them. Give them opportunity. When America does that, we do it better than anyone. When we don't, and we have a man named Trump who wants to build, a wall and make other people pay for it, we'll have what we have in our country. Well, we're struggling with it too. That's why I'm not acting as if, we can't learn from you too, because we can. Because we have people running for office that say the kind of ignorant things that Donald Trump has said again and again, and people from his party without the courage to stand up, and people from my party without the willingness to fight for that. And so I say, when our countries understand that opening up is in our best interest, we will all be better off for it.
Do you think, though, that there's a job for politicians? It's very easy to say, don't be scared, everything's fine. But, for example, in the UK, many of the people who voted for far right-wing parties in the last elections were white, working-class, poor, who felt that their jobs and their wages were being suppressed. Now, it's great...
Because there were politicians dividing people. When I go into a church, and particularly in the black church in America, there's a tradition of politics because they fought for the civil rights movement, and I benefited from those fights, and I participated as well as a young man. So I tell people the role of the shepherd is to bring the flock in. It's not to exclude the flock. And that means the white sheep and the black sheep and the three-legged sheep and the female sheep and the male sheep and the gay sheep. It means bringing us all in. The reason why Europe and in the United States, the nativists are able to kind of grow is because you have politicians who think they can benefit from that growth. And that is the despicable part of what people like we do. And I don't mean you and I, but it's the despicable part of what people are willing to do just to get power. They're willing to say anything, they're willing to do anything, including divide people on the head of a pin. Arguing what makes us different. There is no difference between a Syrian doctor and a Spaniard one, or an English one for that matter. And there's no difference between somebody who wants freedom in Latin America or Asia or Africa. We all want the same thing. And I think, yes, there are complications to this, and I'm not, certainly minimizing them. There are. But there are complications we can overcome because we've done it before. In fact, Europe's done it before. Right after World War II, Europe received more refugees than any place in the world. America's done it, with the tremendous diversity that we've had and the immigration that we've had that built our country. And they've come from every corner of the earth. And by the way, here in the Basque Country, in Central California, in the Central Valley, they come from the Basque region. And so if I say, when I see their name, oh, you're from Spain, I say, no, I'm Basque.
Is there another person who'd like to raise their hand and ask a question on the floor? Could we get the microphone to the lady here, please?
Thank you. Hello, my name is Tony Samuel, and I'm with the National League of Cities in the U.S. And
great organization.
Thank you. And what we're experiencing is that local elected officials, regardless of the size of their city or their community, are really facing some challenging times. Whether you're in a small city, whether you're in a large city, there are things happening in the community that is really affecting the ability of the mayor to lead and for the city to respond to some of these challenges. So what do you think are some of the attributes of leadership that whether you're an elected official in a small city or a large city that you need in order to be an effective leader, particularly with some of the challenges and some of the things that we've seen happen in the US.
Well, humility. When I heard that you were speaking, Councilmember, I felt, initially I heard it was the mayor. I felt like I had to be out here. I couldn't be in a green room. I said, I got to give him respect. I got to be sitting here when he's giving his speech. I'd like to think I treated everybody that way, and not exactly that way, but give people respect, even if they're screaming at you, even if they're upset with you, even if they disagree with you. I think having the humility to understand that it's not personal. I think a risk taker. I think the good ones, we were joking. He said some really nice things in his introduction. There's almost no journalist in Los Angeles that would describe me in the way that he did. That wasn't personal. But it also, I think what irked them, I didn't worry about them. I wasn't afraid if the decisions I made were going to be popular or not. I told you that my biggest mistake was a mistake I made with my family. So I understood that after that, there was no mistake I could make that would in any way reach those proportions. So I had to look at the man in the mirror. So I was unafraid to think big, to swing for the fences, to do things that people said, when I started saying we were going to make LA the safest big city in America, people looked at me and said, what? After the 90s? And we walked out, one of the safest big cities in the country. And that was true for climate change and across the board. So I think a leader has to be a risk taker. A leader has to be willing to make the tough decisions. We were talking about earlier, it's easy to make decisions that go against the interests of your opponents. It's a lot more difficult to make decisions that go against the decisions of your supporters. I did that again and again and again. And I wasn't happy to do it. I wasn't doing it just to do it. I did it because the circumstances required it. And I think leaders have to do that. And then finally, I think it is important. I think the reason why they dislike us so much is because they think we're inauthentic. Because we think we have to be all things to all people. There's what, 100 people here today? 40 of you might say, I think he was full of beans. I don't know why we even sat here for an hour. The other 10 might think, no, I thought it was a really great thing. You got to understand in these jobs, not everybody's going to agree with you. Not everybody's going to like you. And once you understand that, you're free. So he asked the question and then said I was a politician because I wasn't going to announce what I was going to do.
You can always ask.
What I'm very clear about on the next chapter is I just got to be me. Not everybody's going to like that. But I think leaders have to understand people, even if you try to be someone else, one, you're not going to do a good job at it, and two, people are going to see right through it. You can't be all things to all. So authenticity, risk-taking, humility, very, very important. And finally, I think great leaders are uniters. They're not dividers. They're President Obama gets beat up all the time. And I don't agree with him on everything. I was with Hillary Clinton the first time around. I went with him after he won, but I campaigned for him and I believed in him. And I'll tell you something, when I see the things they say about him in my country, what I love is he's creating his own path and he's trying to bring the country together. And I think that's what a leader's supposed to do. A leader's supposed to unite us, not divide us. I don't care what politics. You could be on the right or you could be on the left. But you got to be someone who brings people together. And so those are the 4 attributes. There are more, but
This notion of unifying, and we talked about looking out the window here, you see this amazing museum, this amazing gallery. It's the thing that unifies the city. Everyone's proud of this thing in the city. And when we're talking about our communities becoming incredibly diverse, when we don't all have the same faith, speak the same language, believe in the same things, what are the things, because we talk about all the tough stuff, fine, I understand education, it's great to have a wonderful subway, but what are the things that actually make you a city in the end then? Is it for you art? Is it sport? Is it actually the softer things in the end that are going to make us communities, not just the tough decisions you have to make?
Well, I think Bilbao understands. I mean, it can't just be the physical things. It is the arts. It is architecture. It is culture. Now, what I say, again, being a uniter, I want the arts to be for everyone. I want culture to be not just for the privileged and the few. We should all participate. And as an example, my city, when the Arts Cultural Affairs Department spent a lot of their time on, the symphony and the traditional cultural affairs, and I wanted to bring African music to non-black areas. I wanted to bring salsa to non-Latino areas. I wanted to bring us together through the arts. So I think the arts and culture are very, very important. And particularly in a town like LA, which is known for entertainment and the arts, we haven't really understood that. And again, I mean, I hope you turn around for just a moment, not the second, but
No, because then you get Kevin standing there
trying
to tell me to wrap it up.
Look at this great building,
No, but look at
everybody.
Kevin, because that's
Look
the
at
signal
this
I'm
great
getting.
building, and from the, you see the river alongside it, and then they're bringing you, and they're connecting ideas. I mean, this is what they're doing. They're creating a dialogue around great ideas in urban space in a city that sees itself as great. And so that's what we all have to do. But yes, the intangibles, art and culture, but again, broadly applied. So I did do $10 million for Walt Disney Hall when I was Speaker of the Assembly, but I said, I want to see poor people in Walt Disney Hall too, not just the season ticket holders. We want everybody to be able to dream to one day work and be a conductor or violinist, not just the people who can pay for the tickets. So bringing art and culture down to the people is critical. So we did a lot of fairs and a lot of cultural events that brought people. We celebrated LA's diversity, and one of the greatest things about that, we do an essay contest and a art contest. And it was beautiful to see a white child write about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, or a black child write about Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, or an Asian child talking about how, or a black child talking about how the Chinese built the Southwest and built the railroads and really contributed to it. So we use the arts and essays and culture that way to kind of connect us. And that's what I think, that's when it gets real exciting, to use it to bring the city together. And I think, again, not just to speak accolades, I want you to tell the mayor all the nice things I said about his city, but it really is a great place, and they obviously understand that. And I would have liked, to be honest, I mean, I almost laughed when you described me as a guy who was willing to go out the way I was. Believe me, it was not popular, but I understood it had to be done. And they understand it has to be done. People come to LA and they realize, wow, oceans and mountains and people in every community, and you could eat at every restaurant all over the world. You go all over the world, just going from one neighborhood to another. And that's a beautiful thing.
Well, we certainly busted out that time, but I think you'll agree it was certainly worth it. A very kind of more spicy starter to things you may have expected. I think we've laid out lots of the arguments we'll be touching on over the coming days. But thank you, Antonio Villaraigosa, the 41st Mayor of Los Angeles, and next, who knows?